Good morning. The Unitarian Church of Montpelier is located on Western Abenaki land, which has long served as a site of meeting and exchange amongst Indigenous peoples. The Unitarian Church of Montpelier honors, recognizes, and respects these peoples as the traditional and ongoing stewards of the lands and waters on which we gather. In that same spirit, we will respect, protect, and be good stewards of this land for as long as we walk upon it. I'm Ansel Plug, a member of the UCM board. Thank you for joining us in this time of worship from wherever you are. Whether you are on Zoom, on Facebook, or watching the service on your own time, we deeply appreciate your presence and fellowship. The Unitarian Church of Montpelier is a Unitarian Universalist congregation founded in 1864. We are a religious community that welcomes all as we journey together seeking spiritual wholeness and justice in this world that we live in. Whether you are a newcomer, a longtime member, or somewhere in between, you are part of our community and we are glad that you are here. If you are joining us in Zoom, the chat function will be on for much of the service. It's a great way to publicly welcome and support one another, to affirm the hard work and effort of our worship team, and to share good vibes and positive thoughts with each other. For technical issues or constructive thoughts, please private message one of our Zoom hosts, indicated with an asterisk by their names, or join us for coffee hour after the service to share with them there. Thank you to our virtual greeters who are offering hospitality and tech help throughout the service. Additionally, on Zoom, click on the live transcript button wherever it lives on your screen for increased accessibility. You're invited to join in an outdoor gratitude circle in the churchyard next Sunday, November 21st in the afternoon. Space is limited to 20 people per time slot. There will be singing with masks on, and we will hang gratitude leaves from the trees. Please RSVP using the link in the e-news. The holiday fair is in full swing. You can place an order for pecans, baked goods, and takeout dinner. Wreath orders are now closed. Pickup will be on Saturday, December 4th. Check the e-news for the links to all the order forms. Finally, please read the weekly e-newsletter to learn more about the many upcoming events in our church community. And now, let us enter more deeply into our time of worship with the Prelude.
Thank you, Eliza, for that beautiful prelude. Good morning, everyone. I am the Reverend Joan Javier-Duval. I use she, her pronouns. Our opening words this morning are by Karen G Johnston. As we gather this morning, let us be a people of not forgetting. Let us practice holding collective memories that might otherwise slip into that enormous void that sucks at and corrodes any future we hold dear. Let us practice honoring truth-telling up from the past that must come fully into the now, lest we falter and fail, lest the whole remain in pieces. Let not our need for comfort or simplicity, for easy forgiveness or false pardon, smother the heartbreak that still needs healing. Let us practice resilience with reckoning. Let us marry memory and promise. Let us dance in the tension we find there. Let us rest in the integrity we cultivate there. Let us be partners with the possibility that emerges there. It is good we gather together. And now I invite you to join in singing our opening hymn from wherever you are this morning. My life flows on in endless song. We are pleased to have Amy and Ashley Sweet leading us in our chalice lighting and congregational covenant this morning.
Let us now light the chalice, symbol of our Unitarian Universalist faith. We invite you to light a chalice at home if you have one nearby. We light this flame, enduring symbol of our collective commitment to lead with truth and compassion. Please join us now in saying our congregational covenant. We covenant to speak honestly and listen deeply to each other and the voice within. Treat each other with compassion and honor our differences. Take responsibility for the impact our words, actions, and inactions have on each other. Support each other in times of need and of grief, and celebrate the beauty and joy in our lives. Honor the gifts of our past and be gentle with each other as we grow. Encourage each other in the brave work of creating a more beloved community and a healthy, sustainable world. And forgive each other and start again.
Thank you, Amy and Ashley. Great to have you in the sanctuary with us. Last time I was here with you all, we were talking about the ancestors. And for today's Time for All Ages, we are touching on that theme again. If there are any kids nearby in your household and you want to call them forward for the Time for All Ages, I invite you to do that. Our theme this month for November is Holding History. And last week in the Children's Chapel, the children came up with a hand gesture for it. I invite you to try it. We took things behind us in the past and we bring it forward and we hold it to look at, cherish. So, holding history. And I have something here in the basket that has to do with our Time for All Ages. Some of you might remember it from the not so distant past. A few years ago, this was the topic of a Time for All Ages. Let's see if you recognize it. It's a picture, right? A picture of a bird. And if you notice, that bird is facing forward. But what's it doing with its head, its face? It's looking backwards behind it. And this is a symbol of a special bird from the Akan tribe in Ghana in Western Africa. And the name of the bird is Sankofa. I invite you to say that with me now. Sankofa. Great. And Sankofa means go back and fetch it. The story of Sankofa comes from the African proverb that teaches it is not taboo to go back and fetch that which you have forgotten. Meaning, you can't know where you're going if you have forgotten where you come from. They say that the egg of the bird represents the gems or the knowledge of the past upon which all wisdom is based. And so I want to share with you the story of the Sankofa bird. The Akan tradition is an oral tradition, and most of their stories are not written down out loud. And even though we live far away from Ghana, I think the message of the story translates to wherever you are tuning in from this morning. The story begins with a bird named Sankofa. Sankofa grows up in her community, confident in herself and loving life. This makes me think of the children in our community, in our congregation. All of those children, if you're listening or not, who illustrated Abnaki words that are in the front of our church building for this month. Or the middle schoolers who last month learned how to press cider. Or the high school youth group that on Thursday evening went to the high school to support Anna, who had one of the lead roles in the play there. All of you are feeling the love and confidence of being held in this community. And so she grew up feeling loved and confident. But one day, I don't know why, she decides to sneak away from her village. On her journey away from the village, she meets another bird when she does not know, and that bird insults her and causes her to doubt herself. And I don't know what the insult might have been, but sadly, I imagine that most of us listening can imagine a time when we have been insulted or remember a time. I invite you to take a moment and think of some time in your life when someone said something unkind to you. Does that emotion come back to you when you even just remember that moment? When we hear that part of the story, we can imagine how she might have felt, and her confidence was gone. The example that always sticks with me from when I was young, there were a bunch of kids on my street in the Richmond Village, and it was getting dark. And one of the older kids looked at me and he said, "You have big buck teeth. You have such big buck teeth." And he just laughed and laughed. Well, I tried to act like it didn't bother me, but it really did. I was embarrassed and sad. And I did just what the Sankofa bird did. I went home. Now, Sankofa returned to her village in order to find herself again and to confront this voice of the big bird, where that insult kept repeating itself. But she is supported by all of her friends and ancestors. In my example, I can't remember exactly what happened when I got home to my family, but I do sort of remember one of my older brothers comforting me. I remember him pointing out that I didn't have buck teeth, which tilt way out, but I did have big teeth, and so did my brothers, and so did my parents. And that's part of being an Earl, having a big, toothy grin. And it was a beautiful smile, and it makes others smile and feel good. And you know what? That made me feel a lot better. When Sankofa returns to that bird, the one who insulted her, when she has her own sense of knowledge and confidence back, that bird disappears. And I don't remember if the boy in my neighborhood disappeared. I don't think so, but he never said anything about my teeth again. And even if he had, it wouldn't have made me feel so badly, because I knew my smile was part of my history, part of who I was and my family. And it was nothing to be ashamed of or embarrassed about. In fact, when I met Lincoln, my now husband, he said he liked my smile. I said, I have sort of a love-hate relationship with my smile. And I remember he said, well, I think I have a love-love relationship with your smile. It's a good line. You can see why I married him, right? Well, when Sankofa returns back to her village after her journey away, her image is carved so that other youth in the village can remember her and her story. Because she had forgotten where she came from, Sankofa was carved with her neck turned backwards. And so I hope that today you remember her story too. What was the bird's name again? Sankofa. I see you mouthing it. Very good. Yes, Sankofa in the Akan language means go back and fetch it. In closing, let's try to be that Sankofa bird for a moment. I invite you to stand up as you're able. I'm going to face east, the direction of new beginnings, and we will face the future, which is what we need to do. But first, we look back towards the past. You can reach behind you, retrieve what is useful, learn from the past, integrate it into the present, and then move forward into the future. Let's try that one more time. So with Sankofa, we reach back says the past is a pathway to understanding the present and shaping the future. Thank you, everyone, for hearing the lesson of Sankofa this morning.
Thank you so much for that, Liza. Our generosity is a form of love and gratitude. Our gifts freely given help us to practice Unitarian Universalism within and beyond our congregation. Each month, through the UCM Community Pouch Program, we share part of our collection with an important church fund or a community organization aligned with our values. During the month of November, our Community Pouch recipient is Just Basics, the parent organization of the Montpelier Food Pantry. Your contribution to the Community Pouch this month will directly support Just Basics. You can make a financial contribution today by donating online. Go to ucm.org and click Donate to UCM. There are options to contribute to the general fund, which supports the general operating budget of the church, to the Community Pouch, or both. You can also mail a check to the church, or you can use our text to give option. Simply send a text message with the word give to 802-266-4848 and follow the instructions sent to you. We are so grateful to each and every one of you for your generosity in its many forms. And while the offering is given and gratefully received, please enjoy our musical offering.
I'm going to tell you about the piece that the choir was going to be presenting today. Unfortunately, the precipitous spike in COVID numbers last week made us temporarily suspend our in-person rehearsals and thus our recording session. That piece was the exquisite Lacrimosa from Mozart's Requiem Mass. Requiem Masses consist primarily of prayers for the repose or the rest of the dead. But what about when the dead carries a heavy burden of guilt? Can repose be so easily wished for or granted? That's what the Lacrimosa musically wrestles with, concluding with an even more insistent prayer for repose. In place of the Lacrimosa today, we offer an equally exquisite prayer for repose, the Pie Jesu from Gabriel Faure's Requiem, performed by Voces 8.
Invite you now into a time of meditation and prayer, continuing to hold the depths of that beautiful music in your heart and soul, holding that peace, that solace. Invite you to take a breath to arrive more fully into your body, however it is feeling this morning in this moment. To tune into your breath that gives life. To notice your heart, your surroundings, the quality of your spirit this morning. I invite you to feel our connection and our communion across space and distance, reaching towards one another. In our time of meditation and prayer, we hold and lift up all of the joys and concerns that each of us might be bringing into this time of worship this morning. If there is a joy, a celebration, a gratitude that you'd like to share with our community, you're welcome to put that in the Zoom chat or Facebook comments. If there is a grief, a concern, a sorrow that you'd also like to share, you can type that in. Let that be known into our community. We won't be reading those aloud this morning, but we open up that space to witness to one another's joys and sorrows. Ruth Whitty is our lay pastoral caregiver who is available this morning to lend a listening ear of care. Ruth, I think, has already shared her phone number in the chat and might be able to do so again. She will be available after the service for a phone call if you'd like to share more deeply with someone. So let us be mindful of all that we are carrying on our hearts this morning. Let us lift up with our minds and spirits all those who are grieving, all those who are lonely, all those who are struggling with mental health and well-being. As we join our hearts in meditation and prayer, I offer you these words by the poet and writer Pádraig Tuama. Prayer, like poetry, like breath, like our own names, has a fundamental rhythm in our bodies. It changes, it adapts, it varies from the canon. It sings, it swears, it is syncopated by the rhythm underneath the rhythm, the love underneath the love, the rhyme underneath the rhyme, the name underneath the name, the welcome underneath the welcome, the prayer beneath the prayer. So let us pick up the stones over which we stumble, friends, and build altars. Let us listen to the sound of breath in our bodies. Let us listen to the sounds of our own voices, of our own names, of our own fears. Let us name the harsh light and soft darkness that surround us. Let's claw ourselves out from the graves we've dug. Let's lick the earth from our fingers. Let us look up and out and around. The world is big and wide and wild and wonderful and wicked. And our lives are murky, magnificent, malleable, and full of meaning. Oremus, let us pray. I invite you to join me in a brief time of quiet meditation, after which we will sing together, Spirit of Life. Our reading this morning is the poem History by Linda Hogan. Linda Hogan is a Chickasaw novelist, essayist, and environmentalist. This poem can be found in Split the Rocks, The Quarry, a social justice poetry database. History. This is the word that is always bleeding. You didn't think this until your country changes, and when it thunders, you search your own body for a missing hand or leg. In one country, there are no bodies shown, lies are told, and they keep hidden the weeping children on dusty streets. But I do remember once a woman and a child in beautiful blue clothing walking over a dune, spreading a green cloth, drinking nectar with mint, and laughing beneath a sky of clouds from the river near the true Garden of Eden. Now another country is breaking this holy vessel where stone has old stories, and the fire creates clarity in the eyes of a child who will turn it to hate one day. We are so used to it now, this country where we do not love enough, that country where they do not love enough, and that. We do not need a God by any name, nor do we need to fall to our knees or cover ourselves, enter a church or a river. Only do we need to remember what we do to one another. It is so fierce what any of our fathers may do to a child, what any of our brothers or sisters do to non-believers, how we try to discover who is guilty by becoming guilty, because history has continued to open the veins of the world more and more, always in its search for something gold. The image of the Sankofa bird, which Liza spoke of earlier in the service, is striking. In many ways, it defies logic. The bird's head is turned backwards, even with its feet facing forward. The image illustrates the meaning of the word Sankofa, return and get it. Within this one image, past, present, and future connect. It is a symbol of the importance of learning from the past. Like the Sankofa bird, we decide what is worth retrieving from the past. We do so with the desire to have a deeper understanding of life so we can bring that wisdom forwards. A quandary for us is that the past is not neutral terrain. On the one hand, there are elements of the past that can elicit positive feelings. Aspects of the past can envelop us in its warmth, making us feel more at home in ourselves and our place in the world, like a cozy knit sweater or warm blanket on a chilly November evening. Many parts of our shared history can make us feel proud. I invite you to think of some historical event or person that makes you feel proud and brings you comfort. In this way, the words of William Faulkner, "The past is never dead, it's not even past," can be a balm. These moments and people from the past can bring succor for the isolation one might feel in going through a challenging time. Yet, we know that when we look backwards, like that Sankofa bird, we can also find painful events whose ripples are still seen and felt today. Much of this painful truth has been buried or ignored, histories that we'd prefer to forget. On a collective level, there is much in our history that goes unnamed, unclaimed, and unexamined. In light of this tendency, I was moved by an event that took place on October 16th, just a few weeks ago. On that day at the State House, the leaders of each of our legislative chambers read a statement of public apology for the state's role in eugenics. The public apology came after the Vermont legislature passed a joint resolution earlier this year, quote, sincerely apologizing and expressing sorrow and regret to all individual Vermonters and their families and descendants who were harmed as a result of state-sanctioned eugenics policies and practices, end quote. This apology came 90 years after Vermont's sterilization law was enacted. The law was used for decades following its passage to sterilize targeted populations who were deemed unfit to procreate, including Indigenous people, French Canadians, mixed race people, people with disabilities, and the poor. Sitting in the chamber that day of the apology were about 30 people, including a number of Abenaki people who had been directly impacted by the state's policies. Much of the history of the eugenics movement in Vermont and throughout the United States has been pushed away and made part of a forgotten past. This movement and the policies associated with it caused an incredible amount of pain for those who were targeted by it. For those directly impacted by the eugenics movement, forgetting can be an act of survival. Yet we know the trauma continues to live on. In speaking of the pain we cause one another, the poet Linda Hogan writes, only do we need to remember what we do to one another. This act of remembering, this turning towards the painful parts of our past is a necessary act of repair and a necessary act for shaping our present and future. In this spirit, I invite you to join me in turning towards this part of our past. In the early part of the 20th century, eugenics was gaining in popularity in the United States. Vermont was not alone in having active support for ideas and policies that sought to improve upon the human race through the control of breeding within the human population. In 1935, 33 states had state-sanctioned sterilization policies in place based on eugenics theories. Eugenics was much more popular than most of us would assume today, and it was supported by a surprising number of liberally minded historical figures, many affiliated with progressive social reform of the early 20th century, including liberal religious clergy. Eugenics first came into public consciousness in Vermont in 1912, when the outgoing governor, John Meade, gave his farewell address. In that address, Meade told the Vermont legislature that it was time to do something about, quote, our degenerates, quote, unquote. And he suggested that marriage restrictions, segregation, and sterilization would be appropriate measures. Meade expressed a concern that was already present and growing in the state of a perceived decaying of the upstanding old stock of Vermont's original Anglo-Saxon settlers. Eugenics tied this degeneracy to heredity, and Meade's remarks were the first time eugenics policy was publicly endorsed. The former governor's remarks paved the way for University of Vermont zoology professor Henry Perkins to create the Eugenics Survey of Vermont in 1925. Perkins was a Mayflower descendant who married another Mayflower descendant, and both came from families of distinguished academics. The Eugenics Survey, which ran until 1936, collected data on dozens of families believed to show one of 3 Ds: delinquency, dependency, and mental defect. 10 families were chosen for detailed pedigrees that were published as part of the survey. Those who ran the survey used state records and interviews of people who knew the families to put together these profiles, which were meant to illustrate the degenerative nature of these individuals. The survey was used in 1931 to support passage of legislation called an Act for Human Betterment by Voluntary Sterilization. Earlier attempts had been made to pass sterilization laws in 1913 and 1927, and in 1931, there was enough support to make it legal. Vermont's passage of this sterilization law was made possible by a US Supreme Court ruling 4 years earlier in the case Buck versus Bell. Carrie Buck lived in Virginia and was 17 when she was committed to the Virginia Colony for Epileptics and Feeble-Minded. This colony was established in the Progressive Era in part to provide care for a vulnerable population, but also to separate out and to remove this population from the gene pool. It was here that Buck was deemed unfit to procreate and was targeted for sterilization. Although a sterilization law had already passed in Virginia in 1924, those running the colony wanted the affirmation of the courts before proceeding with their plans. And so they arranged a test case with Buck as the plaintiff. And the case went all the way to the Supreme Court, which ruled 8-1 in favor of upholding the law. Of significance for us, Unitarian Universalists, is that 2 of the Supreme Court justices who voted in favor of upholding the sterilization law were Unitarians, Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr. and William Howard Taft, who served as President of the United States from 1909 to 1913. Holmes wrote the majority opinion for the case and stated, "It is better for all the world if, instead of waiting to execute degenerate offspring for crime, or to let them starve for their imbecility, society can prevent those who are manifestly unfit from continuing their kind. 3 generations of imbeciles are enough." Due to Vermont's sterilization law, there were over 250 sterilizations performed in the state between 1931 and 1963. Though the language of the legislation referred to these as voluntary sterilizations, they were in effect compulsory and forced upon those deemed by the medical establishment to have inferior or defective genes. The eugenics movement as a whole in Vermont, as well as around the country, led not only to the egregious indignity of sterilization, it also led to marriage restrictions, the separation of families, and segregation within communities. The impacts of the eugenics movement were profoundly and personally felt. Some people, particularly women who were unknowingly sterilized, would only later realize what had happened to them when they tried to have children later in life and were not able to. The impact of the eugenics survey lingered on as people living in Vermont were afraid to claim their native or other ethnic backgrounds for fear of being targeted and ostracized. I know this history can be difficult to take in, and so I invite you to take a breath with me and to notice what is coming up for you as you hear this history. How do we address such grave harm? It might be easy to say that all these years later, we weren't the ones responsible for these past events and all that pain. Yet the recognition of these past wrongdoings and of the work yet to be done to bring about healing can be powerful. One of the first public recognitions of the impacts of the eugenics movement in Vermont came in 1995. That year, an installation was put together at the Fleming Museum of Art at the University of Vermont that recognized the university's past involvement in eugenics. Henry Perkins directed the museum from 1931 to 1945. Fast forward about 25 years, in June of 2019, just a couple years ago, the University of Vermont issued a statement of apology for the suffering caused by the university's role as proponents of eugenics. This followed the removal of the former UVM president Guy W. Bailey's name from the university's main campus library in 2018. Since then, other institutions have also slowly started to examine and to come to terms with their role in or connection to the eugenics movement. This fall, Middlebury College announced that it would be removing the name of John Mead from the college chapel. The former governor, whose farewell address laid the groundwork for the adoption of eugenics policies in Vermont, was a member of the Middlebury class of 1864. College administration has said that the intention in removing Mead's name is not to erase history, but to engage with it so we can learn from it. As part of the apology statement on October 16th, State Representative Jill Krawinski said, "I am also hopeful that today's apology will bring this time in our history to more Vermonters and lead them to read more about our past so that we all can learn from it and know we need to do all we can to be thoughtful with the laws we create in the future." The beliefs and ideas of the eugenics movement in Vermont and the United States lost favor after we witnessed and experienced the horrendous outcomes of those same ideas brought forward in Nazi Germany. Yet the belief that some people are superior or inferior to others, and the desire to enact policies that would maintain the superiority of one group over another still remain. The harm to individuals and families of these past ideas and policies still remain. We name and recognize the past so that we can remember, put ourselves back together. We name and recognize the past to do our part in bringing repair and wholeness. To address past harm, we can be mindful of the history that shapes those we call neighbor. We can look for the linkages in the present day to what was happening a century ago and notice patterns that can be disrupted. We can commit to not forgetting and to making our present and future actions antidotes to past mistakes. I invite you as you go forward into your week to reflect on some part of the past that needs mending. I invite you to learn more about it, to search out the voices and stories of those most affected, to tend to your own broken heart and spirit if that history has affected you. In our reckoning with the past, may we commit to knowing the stories that bring pain along with those that bring pride. May we learn from the past and commit to building ever more inclusive and diverse communities in which all people are treated with dignity. So may it be. I invite you to join now in our closing hymn, "We Are Climbing Jacob's Ladder," led by Acting Director of Music, Danya Prince.
Please join me now in singing hymn number 211 in the gray hymnal, "We Are Climbing Jacob's Ladder."
As we draw our service to a close, we extinguish the chalice and carry within each of us its healing flame, the warmth of community, and the spark of hope into the days and weeks ahead. As we do so, let us join in saying the mission statement of the Unitarian Church of Montpelier. We welcome all as we build a loving community to nurture each person's spiritual journey, serve human need, and protect the earth, our home. May you go from this hour of worship with the courage to face history with open eyes, an open mind, and an open heart. May you look to the past in its beauty and in its brokenness for lessons for this day. And may you bring forward wisdom and compassion as we shape history in the days to come together. And we conclude our service with the postlude, which will be followed by our virtual coffee hour.